very excited about today's session. It's a session that starts from a conversation across many different geographies and contexts about how excited we are when we hear from people doing work in different cities and different methods, and particularly about how we measure waste in informal settings within these different contexts. So today really is about learning from each other. We're hoping very much that we can have lots of questions and answers. It is a webinar, so when the speakers are talking, please do feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box. They will attempt to answer in that, and we have some space for some live conversations. So I'm going to quickly introduce all of our incredible speakers today, and then we want to get started because we do have quite a busy session. Okay, so in the order that we're going to do our panel today, a big welcome and thank you to Labna Ananakrishnan. I practiced that once. I hope it was all right, Lubna. So Lubna has a background in economics and is a program manager at the Solid Waste Collection and Handling, SWACH, some of you might know well, and at KKPKP in Pune in India. SWACH is India's largest and first wholly owned waste picker cooperative. And they have been integrated into the city's formal waste management system for over 10 years now. At SWACH, Lubna manages waste-related projects, setting up waste picker-owned scrap shops, dealing with extended producer responsibilities around plastic and other livelihood generation projects. A big welcome. Thank you very much for being here with us today. And then we have on the chat too, Simon and Mbata. Simon, it's always lovely to have you here. I don't know if it's possible for you to put on your video quickly, just so everyone can see you. And hi, Simon, there you are. Simon is a national coordinator for the South African Waste Pickers Association, SAPA. He's based at Vaal Park Recycling Centre in Sasolburg in South Africa. And he's implemented a zero waste program there, including separation at source and door-to-door collection. And Simon always impresses many of us because he speaks all of our 11 official languages. And so in many ways is a great organizer. Simon, welcome. Thanks so much for agreeing to be part of today.
Welcome, thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Next on the panel is Victor Argentino. And Victor has become a really great friend of us here in Durban. So generous soul who shares lots of information. He's a technical assessor at the Polis Institute in Sao Paulo, Brazil, working on compost and cultivation campaign. He's got a degree in environmental and urban engineering and really has got a sort of deep knowledge of composting and waste management in municipalities and with different companies in Brazil for over 5 years now. So the focus of his work is to co-develop and adapt innovative and viable composting solutions, especially looking at organic waste in the local Brazilian context. So welcome, Victor. So nice to have you with us today. And then another friend, last but not least in the panel, is Ana La Rocha. She's the executive director of Nicofaggio, based in Tanzania. Ana holds a master's degree looking at business strategy for sustainability and marketing. But she's got over 15 years experience working in different community engagement projects and has been in rural Tanzania now for 7 years, catalyzing income security for local communities through social entrepreneurship programs. And Anna is always wonderful to have in conversations. So Anna, a big welcome today. And then, as you would have seen from the program, after the panelists have spoken and we've had some chance to ask some questions, we have asked Sibu Nair to close it, just to give a sort of overview. He is Gaia's lead on organics in Asia and previously also led a large zero waste program, very familiar with municipal level implementation of zero waste, and both what it takes to convince governments of its value as well as how to undertake effective implementation. So Shibu, we're really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the panel as we end the day. So welcome as well. All right, everyone, I think without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Labna. We're going to turn our videos off. Labna will keep hers on, and we look forward to your presentation, Labna.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Okay. So for today's presentation, I'm going to share some insights I have from working with waste pickers in Swachh and KKPKP and doing various waste characterization studies for a wide range of applications. So first and foremost, I know everyone here knows this already, but waste data is really, really precious. It can be extremely tedious and extremely time consuming to collect. And what really ends up happening in practice is that once you have a decent data set, you go back to it and refer to it for years and years. We have a data set from 2015 that we're referring to today in 2021. So it's difficult and time consuming, but it's worth making the most of your data if you're going through this kind of exercise. The aim here is to have a reliable data set, and you want to have enough meat in this data set to be able to use it for a few different purposes and not have to go back every time you need a slightly different set of data. So I'm going to cover my experiences in what kinds of data we found useful, what mistakes we've made, and what I think can help when you're planning a data study. So the key aspects, the big questions: why are you collecting the data? What categories are you going to use? When, where, and whose waste are you going to study? And how you're actually going to go about the exercise. So I'll talk about each of this in some detail. So the first question you need to ask yourself is why you're collecting this data. And here I don't just mean the immediate need of the data. So what happens is sometimes you are commissioned to do maybe one waste characterization study or a brand audit. But what is useful to think of is what other advocacy projects do you have going on? What other waste projects do you have going on? What other waste have you needed, waste data have you needed in the past but didn't have? So it's a good idea to think about all of this and club as much as you can into this one exercise and get a good comprehensive data set. So I've listed some of the various things that we've used data for in the past to quantify work of waste pickers, to quantify greenhouse gas impacts of waste pickers, recycling versus non-recyclable materials, calling out brands and brand audits, advocacy with governments, and even quantifying impacts of our interventions. So it's good to think about the whole application set and try to design a study accordingly. So next is when, where, and whose waste you want to study. So you could be studying waste for a few different reasons. So the big three categories I would say are waste generation, waste recycling, and waste leakages. So if you want to study waste generation, the best way to go about it is to get to waste as close to the source as you can. And if you want to study, for example, household waste generation, so not just getting it right at the source, but also making sure you have good stratification within the sample. So for households, a big factor affecting waste generation is income. So if you're studying waste from households, get a good mix of high, low, and medium income. Something that's helpful later when maybe you have to plan an intervention in a part of the city that's mostly medium income or mostly high income, you know what kind of waste to expect in that area. The next is recycling. So the best way to go about this, if you work with waste pickers, is to get input from waste pickers on what they would recover from this waste. And I always think it's great to combine generation and recycling. So if you're going to do a generation study, you have like the whole set of data. Recycling is going to be a part of that set. So if you are going to collect waste generation study, I highly recommend combining it with a waste recycling study as well. But, and I'll get into this in some detail, you need to pay very close attention to how you categorize and sort the waste. And the next part is leakages. So waste generation minus waste recycled is one type of leakage. But when you're looking at something like a brand audit or you want to call out polluters, then you are looking more for leakages that happen, maybe waste that is ending up in oceans, rivers, waste that's ending up on the beach, in parks, in public places. So you wouldn't do a generation minus recycling, you would probably have to do a sample in one of those public places. So think about what kind of advocacy, what kind of projects you'll be using it for to determine where you are going to go to collect the waste. Another important thing is timing. So waste characterization varies a lot. It varies day to day within the week, seasonally across the year. And there could be special festivals because of which it varies. It's very easy to understand why you may have more time on the weekend to cook more food and create more organic waste, or clean up your house and throw out more dry waste. Seasonal variation plays a huge role both in waste generation and waste recycling. So waste recycling, for example, in India, it really slows down during the monsoon. A lot of lower value material, which is recyclable in other times of the year, the recycling chains for those materials like low value paper and low value plastic, they completely shut down in the rains. So those kind of things are important to look out for. If you are studying waste at a time where schools have just closed for the year, then you will find a lot of notebooks and textbooks being thrown out. So a lot of paper waste, a lot of kids outgrowing their school uniforms that may end up in the waste. So it's good to be cognizant of what seasonal variation you may be capturing and to note that down with your data. Avoid any festivals that coincide with extra waste generation. So in India, during the Diwali festival, it's really common for people to clear out their houses and throw a lot of things out, which really skews waste data. So we avoid times like that. So you would avoid like spring cleaning, you would avoid Christmas week when people are getting gifts and generating more waste than usual. So what I recommend in terms of a sample here is to get a stratified sample. So different income categories, cover a full week, Sunday to Sunday, Monday to Monday kind of thing, and look for an average time of the year. There is no good thumb rule for average time of the year, but you should just be cognizant of what seasonal variation you may be catching and be sure to note that down. You can get an idea of this by talking to waste pickers, scrap shops in the area. If you're part of a waste or waste picker group, you probably know this already, but it's good to note that down with the data set. The next is what I think the most important takeaway is on how to categorize waste. So once you have your waste sample, the next thing you're going to do is sort it into a bunch of different categories. So if there is only one thing, one piece of advice I can give on this, it would be to go as granular as possible. Later, you can always club subcategories, but if you find yourself in a position where you have to disaggregate data you've collected in the past, it's impossible. So make sure to collect as disaggregated data as you can. Waste is categorized differently at different stages in the recycling chain. So think about why you need this data, what various uses you may have to figure out what level of granularity you need. So if you look at the pictures here, mixed hard plastics, this large category of waste is how waste is typically sorted by waste pickers in Pune. But what happens is this mixture actually contains a bunch of different types of plastic resins. So you will find PET, PP, HDPE, PVC, PS, all mixed into this one type. So if you only study waste as it is sorted by waste pickers, you miss out all of these resin types. So you need to do some level of background research to figure out what categories will be most relevant to you. From past experience, poor categorization, it really does not bode well. So this set of categories is actually something that was used for a waste characterization study by Swatch in 2015. What works is that it maps perfectly onto the way waste is handled in the informal sector. But when you try to combine it with a new data set or with a plastic audit that we did last year, the categories just don't map on. So some of the reasons for this are the resin type categorization is incomplete. You see in some of the categories, we have mentioned the resin types LDPE, PET, PVC. Some resin types are absent entirely, PS and PP are totally absent. And something that we only found out after working with plastics more is that what we have categorized as HDPE is actually the Fuga mixture that I was talking about on the previous slide. So it actually contains a mix of HDPE, PP, and even sometimes other plastics. So it's really important to look a little forward in the chain to see exactly what subcategories your categorization covers. Some materials like Tetra Pak are listed here as plastic. but for different reasons, you may want to categorize it as paper or call it out as a separate material entirely. So those materials are good to look out for and decide beforehand why you would and where you would want to put it. Tetra Pak has even found itself in cardboard if we go by the way some scrap shops buy it. So it's good to do some research on what categories exist and figure out what exactly you're looking for and categorize accordingly. Another thing to think about is advocacy. So this may sound like a painful extra step, but may be really useful for advocacy. So within materials like multi-layered plastics, which is increasingly important for extended producer responsibility movements across the globe, what is really important to show would be the difference between the big MLP packets and the small MLP packets. So even though it's an extra step, it's worth maybe counting the number of small sachets as a percentage of the bigger sachets, or at least weighing them to show how much of this is small and that's why leaks out of the system. Mixed materials like Tetra Pak, like sanitary waste, you may want to call out specifically and reach out to producers to do something about them. And if you go by resin types, there is this number 7 category in plastic specifically, which is other, a notorious non-recyclable mixed plastic category. So it makes a lot of sense to go into what these products are. So the toothpaste and tubes you see there are all marked O. What does that mean? What happens to these plastics? So if you are, for example, doing plastic advocacy, some of these categorizations may be really helpful, even though it's an extra step. So how do you make sure that you don't make mistakes in categorization or categorize at an inappropriate level? The first thing to do is to go and do some background research, speak to waste pickers, speak to scrap shops in the area, and capture the supplementary information you can about the scrap conventions and waste categorizations at different levels. So especially when thinking about zero waste and recycling, it's really important to understand what factors play an important role into a material getting recycled or not. Some things like clear material as opposed to colored material plays a big role in plastics. Color sorting becomes important as you go up the chain. Single source versus double source. There is a lot of mixed material you get. Toys have plastics, metal, all kinds of materials mixed into them. So it's good to even think about the mixed materials you will be getting and how and why you would categorize them. So as a waste picker organization, usually what we are interested in is how they are handled by the informal sector. So sometimes you get pipes that have metal inside and plastic outside, and we would categorize it default to the way that waste pickers would. But it's important to note these things so that you know when you're going back to the data a year or 2 years later, how you handled a certain category. So writing up how you dealt with problematic materials is super, super, super important. Another very helpful thing, which we often forget to do, is to take clear, detailed photos of each category that you actually decide to use. What we found in the past, like with the HDPE, we actually used an aggregate category, went back, looked at photos and figured out that we had used it as an aggregate category and what other materials were included in it. So it may not solve all your problems, but it will help a lot if you're referring to a data set time and time again, if you know exactly how you handle these borderline situations. Another thing to do is to look at existing data sets you have and try to get compatible data. So even though in 2015, I shared an example of how the categorization was not really helpful, if we are doing a follow-up study to that, to draw some insights on how waste has changed over the years, it is helpful to follow that same categorization, even if it's an extra step, just to get a sense of trends. If every time you study waste, you categorize differently, you're never going to be able to do like an overall trend analysis. So sometimes it may seem like too much extra effort, but it's worth looking at old data sets and making sure that you have data that can map on well. And next is logistics of the day. How do you actually collect the data? So I highly recommend doing a trial run to finalize the process that you're going to follow. You may need to sort in 2 or 3 steps depending on what kind of data you want to cover. So to share how we've done it in the past, it's usually been important for us to understand how waste pickers sort the data, as well as to get the entire data set as material types, how they would finally be sorted as they move up the recycling chain. So the way we would do it over a week's time would be on each day to sort the wet and dry waste, and among the dry waste, ask waste pickers or work with waste pickers to sort the way they would in terms of recovering recyclables, what those categories are and what they wouldn't recover. So on a daily basis, weigh the wet waste, all the dry recyclable categories and the dry non-recyclable categories, and ideally dispose of the wet waste. It's difficult to store it for a week. If you have the luxury of storing waste, get rid of the wet waste daily and keep the dry waste, and you can do the detailed sorting at the end of the week. So on a day-to-day level, you get the step one of informal sector sorting. And at the end of the week, you could do a more detailed sorting of resin types. You may want to disaggregate paper in a little more detail. You may want to have special categories of mixed materials as well. So you can spend that time at the end of the week. The parameters you want to definitely cover are at least the categories and weight of each category. But depending on what your end use is, count and volume may be super relevant. So two materials, particularly multi-layered plastics, which is very, very important and center stage in terms of extended producer responsibility advocacy, is something that makes a much smaller impact when discussed in weight, but a much larger impact when discussed in numbers and in volume. And the fact is that with most problematic materials, thermocol, multi-layered plastics, the reason that they don't work in recycling is because they are so voluminous and so lightweight. So it's good to capture that, even if it is something like a quick and dirty number of buckets kind of volume, you can convert that at the back end later. But it is helpful, especially for these lightweight categories, thermocol, and plastic bags, which I recommend at least having some sense of volume or count. It helps a lot in advocacy. And again, have someone there with clean hands handling a camera or a phone, being able to take clear photos of each and every category. Issues that you encounter in compiling the data and going back, figuring out how things were categorized can really, really be made simple by just clear, diligently taken photos. Some things that are nice to have is, like I discussed, volumes for lighter materials. Another nuance that, if it's important to the advocacy or project you are working on, may be worth getting into, is recyclable and non-recyclable components of the same material. So multi-layered plastics or low-value plastic bags, for example, as a category as a whole, they may be recyclable, but specific items that are more contaminated, have too much food waste in them, they may not be viable to sell. So scrap shops may not buy them. They may get rejected for being too contaminated. It's a good idea to get a decent sense of how much of multi-layered plastics could be sold, could not be sold, how much of LDPE bags could be sold and are too contaminated to sell. So it's a little nuanced, or it's a subcategory within each and every type of waste. But depending on what you want to push, what messages you want to push with producers, it could be very useful to say that your materials may be technically recyclable, but because they are ketchup sachets, they are never clean, and so they just can't be pushed forward for recycling. So these kind of things may be important to collect depending on what your end use is. These are all the things I would keep in mind.
Sorry, just for 2 minutes.
Yes,
it's so hard to interrupt you because it's fascinating, but just 2 minutes, please.
I'm done. So this is the nice to have. As a closing statement, the only thing I would like to say is think really carefully about how you categorize. It goes a long way. And once you do a rigorous 10-day exercise, it's really painful to go back to collect just one piece of data. So I highly recommend putting in the extra steps and collecting different levels of data: waste generation, waste recycled, waste leakages, and categorizing it the way waste pickers handle it, the way it would finally get recycled, and nuances within what is recyclable and what isn't. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Lubna. That was just brilliant. When we conceptualized today, we really wanted practical, technical sharing. I couldn't have imagined something as wonderful as what you've just shared with us. Thank you. And I see there's lots of requests that people would like the recording. There are some questions that are coming up if you'd like to have a look in the Q&A in the meantime.
Yes.
And if any of those you want live, please just say answer live and I'll bring them into the session later. All right, Simon.
Hi.
Simon, hi, welcome. Would you like to start?
Yes. Firstly, my presentation is it's not on PowerPoint. I'm going to present from top of my head. I've been doing presentation every day. But what is good about presentation is the fact that you have to relate to people. And the lessons that we have learned is give people more time to ask questions rather than bringing everything as if we know what could reach out to people. In terms of the waste categorization with the informal sector, the most important thing within the informal sector, the sector itself understands the flow of waste. Waste pickers working at the landfill, they know where most of the material comes from. They know where certain materials are more from that area. And when you work with waste pickers, the good thing is even if you start trying to identify the flow of waste, even those that are on the street, because they are always in the waste stream, so they will always try by all means to understand where majority of waste comes from or where the waste that normally gets recycled comes from. The challenge will be sometimes where waste pickers really are excluded in terms of the flow or understanding or the issues related to waste. My experience has taught me that waste pickers are waste managers in their minds. They know better in terms of the flow of waste in their areas. They are the ones who can recommend the volumes to say where most of the volumes comes from. We had separation at source project when we tried to engage on the waste data. In most cases where separation at source happens, that's where you get the best materials. And to launch a separation at source as an organization or as waste pickers, the lessons will be the high income earning areas and the middle class areas are the ones that normally provide a bulk of waste. Paper, plastic, plastic with the form of HDE and HDPE, it's where you get it most from the high income earning areas. Even cardboard, it's from high income earning areas. And you also get a lot of cardboard from retailers, from the stores. So when you work with waste pickers understand this flow of waste. And when you set up a zero waste program, waste pickers can direct you in terms of where the materials are found or which majority of materials come from. One of the lessons also working with waste pickers or the informal sector is that as much as there are challenges within the waste sector, waste pickers know even the value of waste. Waste pickers, as much as they are exploited because they don't get the real value of waste, but the more value waste gives is the more material that will get recycled. HDPE, plastic, it's one of the materials that gets most recycled, and most waste pickers will go for those materials because they fetch better prices on the market. The pricing also determines the collection of material, because there are some materials that waste pickers will always overlook. They are priceless, and like the single-use plastic, we don't have a price for them. They are not recycled at all because it's time-consuming and there's no market available for them. But other materials with markets, we have seen in terms of how much pricing they are fetching, whereby you can get better prices. Also, one of the issues in terms of waste picking and the material flow is that waste pickers normally don't have access to retailers where the bulk of boxes, because of containers and all that, it's derived from. And waste, these areas normally get privatized, even if you want to reach out in terms of the data of which materials and how many materials are collected there, it's a little bit challenging. But waste pickers in some areas have managed to get access to those areas where box can be recycled or box can be collected. Also, the issue of engaging the local government when you set up a project of a zero waste, you have to understand the flow of waste in that area. Like what we did in my area, we targeted the high income in areas because it can sustain the project itself. And waste pickers knew before even engagement to say that these are the areas, if we want to set up a project, where we derive the bulk of the recyclables. And once you set up a separation at source project, like what we did in South Paulo, where the municipality used to collect with 8 trucks, but once the project was set up, the 3 trucks have been cut because all the materials are diverted, the recyclable materials are diverted to the center. So such activities can really benefit in terms of the flow of waste and understanding the materials for in the waste sector. Also, the fact that not all materials are fetching the same prices, we have to be realistic in terms of the low income earning areas where most of waste, even in our areas, that's where we stay. Before we even take out our own waste, we try to in-house recycling. In most disadvantaged communities or low income earning areas, there are not so many materials because they got inside in-house recycled. So the middle class and the high income earning areas, they just give out materials. And most of the stuff that comes from the middle income and the high income earning areas, you'll find it's boxes, plastics, aluminum cans, as well as the PET bottles because of people using too much of a drink. Those are some of the materials that we need to consider when we set up such project. The other issue, I think most have been covered by the past presenter in terms of waste category. And when it comes to the economy of waste, the experience is that most plastics are not recycled. We have few plastic that is recycled. The single use are not recycled. We also have different forms of plastics that it's hard to recycle because they are multi-layered. Some, even if it's single layered, it's not, we don't have markets for them, or there are no markets available. They are designed to be disposed instead of being designed to be recycled or to be used again. So they determine the amount of waste produced, because if there are no markets available, there will be a lot of waste that goes to the landfill. And the lesson is the closer the market, or whereby the markets are closed or available, you'll find that recycling happens at a high rate. But the further you go from the market, that's where you see that the recycling rate decreases, because most of the waste that gets recycled and it fetches a low value, then people start picking what has value. And this thing, yes, there are some products, you'll see them labeled recycled, but because of the prices that they fetch on the market per area, some end up not being recycled because you can't make anything or you can't get anything because your money will be consumed by transport, or taking it to the market doesn't give you anything. So the market also determines the rates and the volumes of recycling. Also, the waste management system, we have learned that where separation at source is being implemented, that's where the volumes picked up. That's where clean materials are derived. And that's where the best quality or the better prices you can get out of this material. So in a nutshell, setting up a zero waste program, taking into consideration the flow of waste in the area, trying to understand also the categories of waste that you get from that area. You'll find that the high income earning areas are the best in terms of launching a zero waste project. And then maybe a second stage will be incorporating the low income earning areas. Because in low income earning areas, it's most disadvantaged, it's most poor communities, and they normally will have in-house recycling. There will be normally a neighbor or someone closer by who do recycling, and people will hand over the recyclable material to those. But the waste stream itself, from the low income earning area, you don't get a lot of materials that you can recycle because in-house recycling has happened. In the high income earning area, rich people, wealthy people, workers who don't have time to do recycling, that's where you derive the most of the material. And even if you set up a separation at source project, it works well in high income earning areas because the communities in the high income earning areas, some of them do have 1 or 2 containers. What we did in our country, we provided 2 containers, and these led to the increase or in terms of separation network. But the lessons was that in high income earning areas, people can provide. You need to engage those communities before and understand what their needs in terms of separating waste. And that works well for us because you end up not spending too much on containers or on bins. So in a nutshell, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks so much. I mean, just an important point too, that waste pickers have a lot of knowledge, not just about the streams of waste, but the kind of geographic areas and the socio-economic landscape of where different waste streams are. So thank you so much. It's fantastic. Lubna, could I ask you to put your video on again quickly, if you don't mind? There's been quite a lot of questions that have been answered already. And Simon, you're welcome to keep your video on too. So I'm going to take 2 live questions. And if anyone would like to raise their hand, we have some time for 2 live questions. So if you've got a pressing question you'd like to ask from Simon or Lubna, please do raise your hand. Yes, Stephen, I see your hand. Please feel free to unmute and ask your question. Stephen, you should be able to unmute now. Stephen, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Oh,
Yes,
you can
welcome.
hear me.
Please do
Okay,
ask your
thanks.
question. Yes, we
Okay.
can.
No, in actual way, thanks everyone. And in actual way, it's not much of a question, but just an additional, and also to say thanks to Simon for giving such a nice presentation, because we are from the same sector in the same country, and we experience the same difficulties that he was talking about. And as he was talking about the multi-layered plastics, you know, that waste pickers, we find it quite difficult to recycle. And also the buyback centers as well don't give the correct information as to what kind of plastics is recyclable, or we know that most of them, all of them are recyclable, but buyback centers don't actually take all the recyclable plastics. So it becomes quite difficult for waste pickers to collect plastics. In a sense, what I've seen nowadays is that waste pickers don't even waste time to collect plastics, of which that makes a very dangerous dirty environment in a way, because now everyone, especially in low income areas where people are not even clued up as to how can they deal with recyclable waste or waste that comes from their households. So I think that's the information that we need to give out, and also that waste pickers are the people that knows where waste comes from, and those are the people that can give correct database as to how much volume from each and every area. Since, well, here in South Africa, what we do, we know on Monday where we go. Sometimes you find that about 4 places that are next to me are actually taking out waste on same day. But I would rather go to a certain area because I know that's where most of valuable materials comes from. So it's true that high income areas, because they don't have time to sort out all these materials and do recycling, they take it as a time consuming thing. So we would go to high income areas to go and collect valuable materials rather than go collect plastics. And also pricing of material is also a difficult thing, because why would I go and collect something that would never give me anything at the end of the day? So I think also pricing is something that we need to deal with. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Stephen. And I'm going to, if you don't mind, bring in a question that is in the Q&A, which is related to this issue of plastics. So we have a question from Grace. Lubna, it's to yourself, but I'm happy to give both you and Simon just a short time to respond on this issue of plastics. She's a young activist, and she's asking, what are the best strategies for young plastic activists to start to be able to get into a sort of zero plastic waste campaign? But Stephen too is also raising some of the challenges around plastics in the market. Yeah. So Lubna and then Simon.
So a good first step would be to figure out what happens to plastics in your area. So like Simon raised, it's a really important point. What is recyclable varies from microgeography to microgeography. So in some parts of the city, you may have big scrap shops that buy multi-layered plastics, but in other parts of the city with very small shops, they may not buy those materials at all, even though technically you would think someone is buying them. So that is a big factor. Depending on what scale you're looking at, I would suggest following the recycling chain, seeing what happens to materials, what factors play into how materials are handled. If you're talking about zero waste, materials that can be reused versus materials that are recycled back into the same items and materials that are downcycled, it's good to understand these 3 differences. Sometimes we can just switch over from materials that are downcycled to materials that can get recycled in a closed loop. So understanding which those materials are is important. Understanding the economics of what makes recycling possible is really important. The volume of materials, the mixed materials being mixed into certain items, it makes it very difficult for those materials to get taken forward. So following that chain, understanding what happens to different types of plastics. If your focus is more maybe on pollution or something like that, then maybe studies on what waste is actually ending up in pollution in your water bodies or in your public spaces is a good way to go, and maybe push for producers of those items to take some responsibility. But it really depends on what scale you're looking at and what kind of action you look to take with it.
Thanks, Lubna. Simon?
Yeah, for me, I always say if it's not recyclable, let's not produce it. As a starting point for activists, they have to understand that most of the products are not recycled, particularly of plastic. As much as they can have a logo of a recyclable item, it's not recycled. I'll make an example of a Tetra Pak, where you'll find it has a label in our country where it says it's recycled. Even if you go to government and listen to presentations, these companies will tell you it's recyclable. But go work with waste pickers. They know each product that is recycled. So normally, once find that these products are not recycled, we have to push for the producers not to produce anything that is not recyclable. We have to say, if it's not recycled or not recyclable, why produce it in the first place? Let it not be produced. We have to push back to the production of non-recyclable plastic.
Thanks, Simon. Yes, absolutely. Fantastic point. We had two hands, but Asipile, I see your hand is down now. But let's take last two questions for the session. So Ellis, if you would like to come in and talk, and Asipile, if you have got a question, let me know with your hand again, please. Ellis, you're welcome to unmute. Oh, okay. So I see you've written,
Okay.
if we can hear you. Hi. Welcome.
Okay. My name is Ellis Parker, and I'm from Ghana. I'm 26, and I'm the founder and CEO of Friday Ghana. Most of the time, we have these challenges implementing such projects in our communities because of lack of funding, lack of resources. So how can we go about this as a young man with this idea or with this project in mind to implement in this community? Because in Ghana, there are a lot of waste everywhere you go. There are a lot of waste in Ghana everywhere you go. So how can we get the support and the fund and the strategies to implement this? Already last year, 2020, I was able to organize a massive community project in one of these communities, and it was successful. But due to the lack of funds, we had a lot of challenges. So how do you come by this? Thank you.
Okay, can I come in and share the experience in terms of the fund? Most of the waste pickers or people working in this sector struggle with funds, like we struggle. But what is good, partner with environmentalist organizations. There are funders and donors outside there who have a passion on environment, and they are really keen to support activities related to environment. The lessons that we have learned in terms of sourcing funds is to work with environmentalist organizations, like an environmental justice organization in South Africa called Groundwork. They assisted because they know some funders who are willing. It's a collaboration among the sector, environmentalist sector. I think that's how to do it.
Thanks, Simon. Lubna, do you want to add to that, or you think it's covered? Covered. Okay, brilliant. Asipile, would you like to ask your question? I know you had, your answer. Okay, she said her question's been answered. All right, fantastic. Then I think what we'll do is we are going to move on to the next two panelists. Just to direct the panelists to remember to have a look in the Q&A. There are some more questions coming through there, if you don't mind, and perhaps some of those you can answer in that box. But I'm going to now invite Victor to join us. And Victor, over to you. Looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Hi everyone, good morning here from Brazil, good afternoon for some, good night for others. And I'll share my screen, just a minute. Everyone can see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Oh. In full screen too?
Not yet, Victor. Yes, now it's in full screen.
Okay, good. Well, after Lubna and Simon, it will be hard and easy to say. They covered basically most important points and also let Phil to talk, but I'll focus a bit about organic waste and our experience here in Sao Paulo, Brazil. To everyone knows, Sao Paulo is located here in Brazil. It's the biggest city in Brazil. We have around 12 million inhabitants. Our metropolitan region reaches 22. We generate something like 15.6 thousand tons per day of waste, and 48% is organic. I'll focus a bit in organic from households, street fairs, public markets, that how can we measure it, how can we work with this in a practical scope. So if you have other questions, go in the chat, I can answer in detail more and then the question and answers. So basically in our city, we have 900 street fairs. We don't have fairs on the Monday, and the other days of the week we have fairs all the days. So we basically sell food in this kind of mixed process of street fairs and public markets. Of course, we have the private markets, but they don't go to the municipal waste collection. So I'll focus a bit in the street fairs and public markets. So how do we measure this waste? I worked in the municipal waste system, cleaning system. So one of our challenges was how do we measure the waste that is generated in these informal places? Because we don't have the exact generation of public affairs. Of course, in some municipalities here, in some places, we have the correct waste that the truck collects, but normally it's not from one single fair, one single public market. It gathers all the waste from the market, and it's completely mixed with plastics, with paper, with cardboards, with metals, and all the stuff that you can find, like styrofoam. And normally, as I'll focus here in organics, we want to know the organic fraction of this. If you have money, you can follow the truck, weigh the truck, do a gravimetric study, and you have the exact percentage of organic waste. But you can also have other approaches to estimate the waste generation, similar to what Lubna and Simon said before, but we have something problematic with the organic waste, is that it's too heavy and it doesn't smell good if you delay to weight it. So you can estimate in other bases. So I'll talk about public markets and public affairs, but it basically the same thing. In Brazil, the public market looks like this. You have one with the closed roofs, but they are basically street fairs that are closed. The street fairs, they are on streets and they have a specific streets that municipality delegated to use in some time and during the week. But the framework is quite similar with that stands. You have basically selling everything from food to clothing to jewelry and all that stuff. You might have most of the waste to come from mixed waste, but normally we estimate here in Brazil that organic waste like food waste, and also what you cannot recover, that's not food, that's really a refuse, like peels and other stuffs that you cannot eat. It's around 70% of the whole waste in the public market and the public affairs, in weight, not in volume, because in volume you have cardboard, plastics, and that's stuff that normally in volume it's the most. So how do we normally measure, and how did we measure some of the waste streams in these places, in public fairs and in markets, when we were trying to project a composting unit here to the city? I would say this is not any methodology like from university, is what we did here that kind of worked. It worked actually, and maybe to work to other places with some adaptations. So we tried to estimate the generation, as we didn't have money and work available to take trucks and go to weight it. So I would say that you can normally estimate the generation at source or at the bucket. So at the source, how did we estimate it? Normally we did both, and then we had an average generation. So at source, we normally count the number of the stands that we have. You can divide it into types of stands, like this one sells like ham, it sells like meat, it sells more food that it's not fruit and vegetables. This one sell fruits and vegetables, the other one sell juices. You can divide in types of food waste, of organic waste, because you sometimes have like a coconut stand that generates a lot of coconuts, that it's a significant waste stream but has specific characteristics. So normally we count these stands, that it's quite fast depending on the size of the waste streams. I heard a noise, I don't know what this means, so if you want to stop and ask something, I guess that you can feel free, Kira.
No, Victor, don't worry. I've muted it with someone's mic. Continue, sorry.
Okay. So normally we define the quantity that sample of that stands generated today, and normally we did it in two types. If you have this possibility, we weighted all the waste that some stands, a sample of stands generated. So you can weigh it in bags. It depends on the way your market, your public affair works. We have public affairs in Brazil that work with bags, some that work with crates, and other recipients or anything, they just lay on streets. So you weight this in the end of the market operation or the public affair operation, and in a sample of stands, and then you can extrapolate to other stands. If you can't wait, or if you can, but as Simon and Lubna said, the most important thing is to understand with the local people, because they know more than anyone. They know more than your balance that will weight the waste, probably, because you wait 1 day, 1 week, they know how this changes in the whole year and the whole season and all that stuff. So a good way to estimate it is to ask the marketer, the owner of the stand, the one that sells the product there, like how many bags, crates, other recipients, piles do you generate each day? What's the approximate volume that you generate? How much does it weigh? And between this, it's important in these places, you have a lot of waste that is proper to human feeding. So you should not take it to composting, to anaerobic digestion. You should take it to feed people, right, in lower costs and food banks from the municipality or from an NGO. So what's the volume of proper waste to eat? What's the volume that it's not adequate to feeding that was already in the floor? And it's important to understand how the separation occurs, and if it doesn't, how it would be to work. At the bucket that we can also have these two pictures. Let's go to place that all the waste is channeled, preferably in the moment that the market close or at the fair finishes the period of operation, and interview people who put the waste in the places or collect waste there, like how many bags, crates, containers do you see in the end of the day that's full? What's the approximate volume of each container it's filled? How many containers this from this market, from this public affair, how many bags, how many crates they generate each day and go to a landfill to open them, that municipality collects. So how does it happen? How much they think it's paper, plastic, organic, wood, so you can estimate how much of this is organic. Especially when we are talking in organic, we don't have this brand audit, so we don't care so much about the type of waste, but you would like to know mainly the difference between like wood, between straw, between carbon-rich material and nitrogen-rich material like vegetables, legumes, or also ham, meat, and all that stuff. Fat also, it's a common waste when you have food preparation. So, and also ask then how much food this is proper to eat, because normally we have in this informal places, you don't have a good separation of proper food to eat and the food that is already rotten, and they put it together in the same place, what contaminates, but normally people also collect there. So simple solutions to separate, to organize the place that you can separate this would be good, and asking then how they separate this waste, how they collect, how they define the food is okay or not. So basically we do this two types of estimation here when we don't have access to a truck that can be weighted in other place that collect all the food waste, because normally in our street fairs, after the street fairs, you can pass in the street fairs and you will see some pictures like this. So when you don't have bags, especially for some heavy waste, you will see this in the corner, in the side of the street. Here's sometimes a piece of this in bags, some that is left on the street also, and you can count. You can take a sample like one of this and weight all this waste, and you count all the piles, and you have to extrapolate this after the public affair. Something interesting that you can do, that after the public affair, most of the people have collected all the waste that they take to pigs, to horses, to cows, to other animals. Also, they have they have collected the food that they will eat. Especially in Brazil, the price of the food, it varies in the fair from the beginning and the end. In the end, you have the most cheap food that we call xepa. So people go there and buy it cheaper because it's the food that normally it's cheaper because it doesn't look well, but it's quite okay to eat. It's normally not contaminated. It does have some a black dot or something like that that decreases the price of selling. So ask the people, as Lubna and Simon said, the people who works in the waste collection, the waste pickers, the people who collect waste in the containers, the sellers. We have here in this public affairs what we call flanelinha, because the flanelinha is the one who manages the car in the public streets, and he can tell you how much containers the street fair generates, because normally he's the one who places the containers to leave space for cars. So these people normally will say to you, oh, we collect 1,000 liters, it's 1 ton. Normally it's 70% is food waste, it's pills, it's other stuff. They will know quite well how much this fair generate, this public market generate. This is the marketers, it's other places. When you have more organized places, the marketers put this in bags and leave in the side of the streets. And in public markets, it works too, that people do this, and you can count the plastic bags full of food waste. You can weight some and extrapolate to the all public fare after it happens. It's a good way to estimate the waste generation in each one. But the most important it's to ask local people that they know more than anyone. They have their lives 20, 30, 40 years working that market in that public affair. So I would say that the most important is to interview them, and of course interview them, and they have trust on you, because when you go search in these places, as I went, if you are from an NGO, with a university, or even if the municipality, most of the people will think that you are like fiscalizing that you will find. So they need to trust you to say everything that happens in these informal places, because normally everything happens in these places, right? So it's important to gain their trust, to present the concept of the project, to show that to the project, and what you are doing, it's to make things better, that it's not better only to the environment. It's very good, the environment, but in these informal places, people want to understand what does it change to them in their daily lives. So explain why it's important to have a healthier place, a better sanitation, that the market will be cleaner, and this won't maybe this won't change their way of practicing the daily working. This won't have much work to them. Ask them what they think is the best way to separate waste. How do they would improve destination? How do they would organize, so you don't mess up good things that might happen? Like in markets here, we have a lot of people that collect waste in the containers. So we don't want them to stop collecting waste, but we want them to collect the good food waste that's proper to human feeding. So how do we improve?
Sorry to interrupt. Just to, if you don't mind wrapping up, because I'm just a bit worried about time. It's always so hard to interrupt. Sorry, but yeah.
No, it's okay. It's in the end.
Okay, great.
It's in the end. So just to finish, as the other said, just pay attention to seasonal variation and events, the size of the sample that you will estimate, separating types of waste as much as possible, but sometimes the available work and money normally determines this amount of the size of the sample, and also how much time you will be sampling. And this just pictures of the municipal food bank here in Brazil that separates waste in crates, that it's proper to human feeding, and our composting plants that receive the waste from public fairs especially. And in households, you can do the same, distributing this little bucket to each household, so they can separate and weight it in the end of the week, in the end of the day, so you have a good sample in different income levels. And this, the other sets also, we can finish and leave it to other questions. Thanks everyone. If you have any doubt, you can put in the question and answers, and also email me after. Feel free.
That's wonderful, Victor. Thank you so much. Sure, I've got a lot of questions, but I'll wait. Yeah, and thanks so much for the images too. It just sort of brings it alive. Okay, I'm a little worried about time, so Anna, I'm going to go straight over to you. Remember, if you've got questions for Victor, please put them in the Q&A, and I'm hoping we have a bit of a chance for some live answers too. But Anna, welcome.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, Anna, we can hear you now.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about measuring waste in informal settings here in Tanzania. We do several different kinds of waste measuring. And so we map illegal dump sites, we do waste and branch audits, different kinds of waste and branch audits, and we also do measure waste at the household level. So I think the question to start with is basically why you are doing it. Are you doing that because you want to advocate for policy? Are you doing that because you want to raise awareness in the community about different kinds of waste? So basically, why are you doing it? And what are the results that you are expecting to get? Because that's going to kind of change the way you are going to do it and what is the preferable modality of measuring waste. So talking a little bit about illegal dump sites. We actually have a systemic problem with waste management in Tanzania, and thinking about Dar es Salaam, which is the biggest city in Tanzania, more than 40%, only 40% of the communities actually have any sort of waste collection. What that means is that a lot of the waste ends up dumped in different places in the city. And that's why it's important for us to map illegal dump sites to be able to show the size of the problem. So for example, in 2019, we did a drone mapping and we mapped 8 rivers in Dar es Salaam. We found more than 2,000 waste spots along those rivers, 1,250 on the river beds. We map the illegal dump sites to be able to show this basically, because some of these areas are extremely hidden. People don't know that this is happening. And a lot of these areas are actually like the waste collectors actually throw their waste on the river instead of taking it to the legal and formal dump sites. And so we measure that to be able to show what the problem is and to show that we need systemic change here. So how do we do that? Basically, we select the areas to be surveyed. So we say, okay, is it going to be all over the city? It's going to be only the rivers, how that's going to be. And then we do GPS location. We measure the size of the dump sites in meters. So for example, 500 meters by 200 meters. We think about that, the accessibility, is it close to a road or not? And if we wanted to clean up these dump sites, what would be required? Can we actually clean up these dump sites or not? And then we also try to measure the kinds of waste that are there. One of the things is when we do a drone mapping, then the drone by itself through the pictures already tries to estimate the volumes of waste and also the kinds of waste that are present in those areas. But we do then the validation of it, the verification of the survey areas. So then we go there where the drones have taken pictures of, and we go there and see, okay, is this dump site still here? Is the size accurate? And are the kinds of waste there, the kinds of waste that are listed from the drones? It's important to remember that when you are mapping a dump site, basically what you are doing is trying to estimate the volume, but several times it's hard to say what the volume is because some of the dump sites are very deep and sometimes the waste has been mixed there for so long that it's also hard to tell what is underneath. So we are trying to get as much information as possible, knowing that it's inaccurate. And this is when you think about, okay, what can I do with that data? Apart from the map that I showed you that shows all the dump sites, you can also try to figure out what kinds of waste. So that's one of the things that we do. We go there and we observe and see, okay, what kinds of waste can we find? Is there PET? Is there HDPE, PP, PVC, LGP? And then we mark, and then we can produce a graph like this showing the kinds of waste that are mostly found in the dump sites. And we use that for advocacy. We also do several waste and branch audits, and that includes cleanups and also marine litter surveys. When you talk about Tanzania and you talk about Dar es Salaam, we are talking about very, very large volumes of waste. For example, in one of our marine litter surveys, we sit at the same spot for between 11 to 13 days, and we collect 150 bags of 100 kilos of waste every single day of those 150 days. So we are talking about very, very large volumes of waste. In the marine litter surveys, we do macro and exo litter accumulation surveys. So basically, we try to figure out, we haven't been doing micro litter, but we have been doing the bigger pieces of litter over there. And we also try to figure out the difference between dry waste and wet waste, because we are trying to figure out where the waste is coming from. We are trying to figure out if the waste is coming from the land or is coming from the ocean. And that's why we separate dry waste and wet waste. So we do that in two areas. You can see here on the map, both two beaches at the end of a river, and then two rivers as well. They have very, very high volumes of waste, as I said. To give you an example, when we measure it, we measure both the pieces, so unit pieces, and then we also measure the weight of the waste. And so from 2019 to 2021, we have counted almost 200,000 pieces of waste and collected almost 14,000 kilos of waste. And then we put everything in bags and we take the bags away as well. And talking again about the kind of waste analysis examples that you can do, you can have graphs like this one that will show you what is predominant in dry sand, what is predominant in wet sand, and also shows you like the predominance of plastic waste, which is something that is very useful for advocacy. We have that per day, so it's a day count for those, and we do many different kinds of graphs. This is just an example. But that really, really helps bringing attention to the most frequently found kinds of waste available here. We also measure the producers. So what we do is that we actually figure out what are the brands available, and also who is producing that waste, and we use this for advocacy. So for example, this graph, one of the things that it shows us is that about 40%, a little bit over 40% of the waste that we find is actually produced by two companies that are two Tanzanian companies, two local companies. And that is very powerful for advocacy. We also do then waste and branch audits, and then we need to remember that sometimes when we are doing waste and branch audits, we are also engaging people that are not from the organization. So we need to do this in a way that we can teach other people to do that all over the country. We lead a coalition of over 150 organizations all over the country, and we do this in 16 regions of the country. And so we need to be able to teach people how to do it, and the methodology needs to be the same for everyone so that we can basically compile all the data and produce a report on it. When we do the waste and branch audits all over the country, normally end up only counting 10% of all the waste found. And that's because the volumes of waste are so big that we don't actually have the time to count everything. And then we segregate the recyclable waste, residual waste, and hazardous waste. Important to say that recyclable several times means waste that could be recycled, and not in every area of the country the same kinds of waste can be recycled. So we basically have a presetting of what recyclable waste is, but it's not recyclable in every single area of the country. And then we divide also into plastic, metal, rubber, glass, and so on. And then the different kinds of plastic, different kinds of paper. And when we do WABA, we normally we normally pay more attention to the unit count of the waste collected. And why is that? A lot of the waste that we are encountering that is like the most prevalent kinds of waste is actually very light. So for example, styrofoam, plastic are not that heavy. And so if you only measure the weight, you may be misrepresenting the problem that you have. and what needs to be done. So for us, it's extremely important to do the unity counts, because by the unity counts, by counting every single piece of waste that we find, we can actually represent in a way that is more accurate the most intense kinds of waste that are there. And then we do the brands and also the manufacturer, producer, distributor sometimes as well. So thinking about what can you do with that data. So these are some of the examples that we have. You can divide between local and foreign companies producing the waste. You can go there and put the unit counts of different kinds of materials here for each one of those. We can also divide the different kinds of package by products, so food products, household products, personal care, and also all the divisions among all of those. And that gives you a lot of power when you are talking. You have like data behind what you are trying to say. And you can also make some nice graphics showing who the biggest polluters in the country are. The producers themselves don't really like when we do that, obviously, but like people normally who see these kind of graphics, they keep those in mind, and it helps with advocacy. And then the last kind of waste measuring that we do, the final one is at the household level. And that is part of our zero waste model that we are implementing here in Tanzania. So this one, like basically when we are collecting waste from the household and trying to measure the waste from the household, what we are trying to estimate is how can we do collection in this neighborhood. So it's less about, it's a little bit less about what what the unity count of the pieces are, the different pieces are, but more about the volume and the weight that is there, because we basically are going to collect that waste and we need to know what materials we need to do so. So for example, we have done household surveys in all these neighborhoods that you see on this map, and we have done specifically waste measuring of 1% of all these 70,000 households that you can see on this map. In this case, we actually measure and count and segregate every single piece of waste that is there. So there is no, we will take as long as we need, but we are going to segregate everything. When we do that, we select the households using QGIS to make it a randomized sample. So basically, we don't want the sample that we are surveying to be biased. So we use a computer to define what those households are, to make sure there is a good representation of the neighborhood. We do the unit count, but as I said, we give more importance to the weight, because we are going to collect their waste and need to know what materials are needed to do so. And in this case, we do the segregation including organic waste. When we do the waste and branch audits, we don't actually think about organic waste. We only think about the plastics and metal and everything else, but not the organic waste. So the organic waste is important at the household level because it's part of our collection system. And then the categorization and sub-categorization of the waste is the same. But we also get specific data on basically what is the volume of that waste. If there are pieces that are kind of out of shape, we try to record that. The nature and the source of the product, is it food, industrial, or industrial waste, or beverage products, and everything. So we collect as much data as we can. And that's pretty much it. So what we do with that, all of that. So for example, we have been collecting consistently data on waste since 2018 in Tanzania. Our data is the most, is the one, we are the organization that is collecting the most data in Tanzania. And because of that, our data has been going to the Tanzanian Bureau of Standards, where they are basically featuring our data in the official reports on waste management. So that gives you a lot of advocacy power. We also use this data in awareness raising trainings, and we use that in advocacy for policy. For example, we have a plastic bag ban in Tanzania, that we advocated for a long time for, using this data, and we are hoping to turn it into a single-use plastic ban by using this data as well. So
Sure.
that's basically the reason why we pay so much attention to data. Thank you.
Oh, this is amazing, Anna. That is so impressive to see the data presented like that. Thank you so much. Wow, fantastic.
Thank you.
So just to apologize to everyone, because I have been not a very good chair and I haven't kept everyone to time. So we're a little bit tight, but to be honest, it was so fascinating hearing these. So if you don't mind, Shibu, I'd love to just bring you in now. And if you have questions for Anna and for Victor, please do put them in the Q&A. We will also share the recording of this too. And we're happy to stay in touch with people if you've got questions afterwards. But Shivu, could I ask you to come in and just sort of wrap us up of what you thought of some of the presentations today, please?
Good evening from India. And thanks for this opportunity and the presentations as well. I think this is a very interesting discussion on quantification, because data on waste is always controversial. This is something which people do not want to account for as well. I think after going through this presentation, I am just trying to summarize some of these additional things, as well as supplementing with what our presenters did. I think all of our presenters did a kind of a very clear picture. I think all these together gives our audience a kind of a clear picture about the importance of data and the way to process it and to perceive the issue of waste. I think one there are many ways of doing this data collection, to the extent of where Anna did that kind of very meticulous, kind of a highly sophisticated data collection. Or the thing is that you should not be afraid by seeing this kind of data, but you can try. We can start from the where there is no data. We can start with very minimum things as well. So the data sources, all of our presenters started with the generation points, or when you look at the generation and the points of generation of waste, there are other way of doing things. You have to make it into sector wise. See, the sector wise data is also important. For example, in a community or in a city, household is a sector. And when you go to the household, you have different economic conditions. That's what Lubna was suggesting. You have high income group or middle income group and low income group. And even Simon was also mentioning to that, because that is very important, because the consumption pattern is different. And consumption data is also important. We have this experience of we started collecting the data from the waste end. At the same time, we had an oral questionnaire to the households or to the shopkeeper on the consumption. So, for example, we will just give a questionnaire asking them to just fill out, okay, how many biscuits you are buying in this week, or what is the quantity, or what is the number of tube plates you are buying in 1 year. So in that way, there's a long questionnaire where you are asking for the consumption. The thing is that there is a psychology, when you go for any social survey, when you ask people about their income, nobody will give you the correct answer. That is a experience in India. You ask what is your income, then people will say it very less. But when you ask about expenditure, they will give you the clear picture, right? Oh, the expenses are too high. We have to spend this much. So this is the same technique which we apply on waste audit. So when you ask people how much waste you are generating, people feel that generating waste is something what you call sinful activity, or it is some criminal activity. So people say, oh, we generate some, say 1 kilo, 2 kilograms of waste, that's it. But when you ask people how much you are buying in, that gives you a kind of a number. This can be cross-checked with the final data, but this is very important in two ways. One, you will get data, plus you are giving an opportunity to sensitize people to think about what they are buying in and what they are wasting it. So that process itself becomes it is not a kind of a mechanical, what you call dry waste collection academic practice. It is an interesting community campaign process. So you just convert the process of data collection into a community campaign so that you are benefiting both. And plus, apart from waste, you can also ask some questions like as Simon was mentioning about their attitude. Whether they are willing to donate it out or how they are disposing it. That is also very important question. Like you just ask, how do you dispose your waste? Some people say we just dump it. Some people say we just bury it or burn it. Some people we give out to the service provider. See, in many cities there are service providers as well as traders. Like people in India, we have seen that we call them kapadiwalas who visit door to door and buy your newspaper, cardboard, high value plastics. So the high value materials are being skimmed out by service providers or kabadiwalas, people who are trading on. They are not waste pickers. They are actually trading from households, and there are in between people. And three, the workers in the institution. For example, if it is a flat or if it is a neighborhood, there are people like working in the hospitality sector or the cleaners or the workers. They also skim the waste. So when you are just focusing on waste pickers, you may not be getting the correct data. See, some of the waste pickers are getting the last material. The waste is firstly skimmed by the traders because the household owner or the business owner is also interested in getting some money out of selling it. And the workers in the household or in that community, they also skim the high value material and they can sell it in the nearest scrap shop. And the service providers who provide waste management services, they also collect all the waste and they also do a preliminary sieving or segregation, and they also sell it. So to get the complete data, you need to follow, you need to map who all are the people potential who are carrying carrying all these materials. So that is also important. So you just look from different angles so that you will get when you keep all these pieces together, you will get a kind of a better picture. And bulk waste generators, you need to have a separate eye on them. Like the bulk waste generators, they are, for example, a new newspaper factory, like maybe a newspaper press. They are a bulk waste generator of paper, but they don't give out or sell their paper waste in the local market. They always have an annual contract with somebody else. So in some organization, community, or some institutions within the city may have annual contracts to dispose their material. So those things we need to identify and then include in our data. Classifications, like I think the classification Anna gave you the spectrum from organic up to e-waste. You have that spectrum. You cannot just focus on what you call plastics. See, most of the organization, when they do waste analysis or waste audit, they just look from their agenda. See, the problem is that if you want to integrate waste pickers or you want to integrate the existing waste management system to a government or a municipal system, you need to have complete data. You need to address all the issue. So when you have all the a comprehensive data, then the government will be interested to discuss with you. And that is the what you call your bargaining point. See, information gives you power. And timing, I think once on a daily basis you can collect, or for a week. And there is another example where some of the groups doing, they just give a bag to a household and asking them to just put all your dry waste into this bag for a week. And after a week, that bag is being collected and that is being segregated, and they count the number, they take the weight and things like that. And other finite complex issues you can also analyze. For example, the Tetra Pak plates, disposable cups and plates made of Tetra Pak. You can also map where it comes from. It will also give you some kind of interesting information. For example, we did a study in Kerala and we found that the Tetra Pak plates, the printed material shows that they were used in some European countries as well as in some even including African countries, and from even South America it was there. So that means that also give you some kind of powerful information for your campaign or to sensitize people. See, we are doing the data collection for a change in the entire scenario, right? So those information are very important. And litter indexing is also good because that also gives you a kind of a monitoring tool. You can check whether the place is progressing from here and there. Transportation is also key when it comes to waste management, especially on recycling. I think Simon was also mentioning about the distance between the recycling facilities and the city. So we need to find out like the kind of transportation mechanism used by the recyclers, and where are the recyclers located, where are the waste traders are located. And with all these things, we can actually help a policymaker to make a decision towards zero waste. You can also collect, like there are existing data. For example, people may be doing cleanups, and cleanups will have some raw data, but from those raw data, we can also find some useful information. And we may have to do some additional surveys to cross-check the data which we created. Like you do a survey, you do a study, and then you get all the data. And maybe you can also take the same thing and you try it somewhere else for 2 or 3 houses, maybe 2 or 3 restaurants or a shop, and then you check like how far it goes. So that also gives you kind of a confidence. So when you are confident about your data, that also gives you power in a discussion forum, especially with the governments and with the corporates to demand for your thing. So that is also very important. And the other thing is that this data makes you powerful. At the same time, it makes you vulnerable. Data with you always attract enemies. See, the waste data, if you just go by the government data, in many places, the data is what you call, it is not the real data. For example, if the community is making 100 tons of waste, it is written as 1,000 tons of waste, because that is the point of corruption. The government spending is based on inflated data in many places. So when you expose it, there are stakeholders. For example, the waste contractors, the corporates are dealing with waste. So you have to be very careful. Lubna and Anna are trying to lure you to come up with perfect, accurate data. But I would say that accurate data may put you, expose you to vulnerability of these kind of issues. But that is we have a case of there is government data for years, 30 tons of waste in the community, and when we did the study and we found that it was only 3 tons at the peak time. So 3 to 30, so that is the kind of a conversion ratio when it comes to the government data. So this is very important. And there was a question, I think, in the question session, like how to do this. Like we don't have resources. Please, you just create a map of your process. Like what are the kind of data you want to generate, from where you have to generate. So you make it into pieces. And the easiest thing is to do is to go to the nearest academic institution, like a college or a school, because they all need some kind of engagement with community. So something their voluntary support, their academic activity support. And for some, you have to find local resources, some sponsors, or maybe an NGO funding to consolidate the data to present it. And presentation is very important. When you make the data, release it in public in a special occasion, handing it over to the policymakers or something like that, to make it as a kind of a newspaper event. That also gives you some kind of visibility in the complete dialogue about waste, so that people will not miss you in any discussion. You will get invitation. That is very important. See, the policy roundtables or the policy tables are always limited to some people. See, once you do create data, then you release it in a public place and you make yourself visible. Next time when they have a discussion, somebody will ask, why didn't you invite those people who have done those study? See, that is a kind of accessing our step, because NGOs, especially NGOs, are neglected in these kind of policy forums, and it is highly important to get us there, or be there to argue our points, especially in favor of the informal sector, to get it integrated. And the other issue is that when we talk about the economies, there is a kind of a narrative: waste is wealth, and you can make wealth out of waste. So you need not pay money for waste pickers who are collecting or do the door-to-door waste. The problem is that, as I said earlier, the waste pickers are getting the skimmed waste. They are not getting the actual valuable item. And with the kind of material they are getting, it is not enough to sustain their activity. But at the same time, the government will, they have no problem in, or the municipalities have no problem in paying tipping fee or a contract fee for the waste to energy projects or the centralized waste management systems. So when you have this data, that is why I said like you have to calculate the cost, the transportation cost, everything. And based on that, we can rightfully argue for a subscription fee or a service fee. Like if they can pay the service providers outside, why can't they pay for the same people? So that we need to have those kind of calculations so that that makes our position very clear in integration. So whenever it comes to the integration part, the many governments, like I have seen in India, they said, okay, let us get them on board. Let us have this waste because, but they are given only identity cards, but not any kind of contract. Only in some places they have these contracts. So the data and the kind of that gives you the complete view of the waste crisis, the sources, where it comes from and where it goes. So all those information also help you to draw an action plan or to help the community or help the city to develop an action plan for zero waste. And once you go through it, I am sure that I think you can actually manage most of the waste as they claim by the, like they say that waste to energy projects, they can manage 90%, like they can manage everything, and the rest will be only 10% of ash. But we can actually reduce more than that in total recovery. So I am just stopping it here, and I'm happy to be here and to like see. I am actually thrilled by seeing these data presentations from our friends across the globe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who stayed, because we have now kept you 15 minutes over, and we really appreciate you staying with us. So I just want to say a really, really big thank you to all the panelists, and also to Cecilia Allen and to Tamlin Fleetwood and to Joe Akbeko as well, who are in the background and have been part of organizing this. This is a first session that we're putting together. And already my mind is, yeah, well, maybe we need a session on the politics of all of this too. It's very useful to know how to navigate it and even share some of the mistakes we might have made whilst we were trying to navigate it. So thank you. I really can't say thank you enough. This has been fantastic. It's, I think, really helped just think through and begin with some of the practical steps as well, and making us think more carefully about what it means when we collect data. What do we want to do with it? What kind of change are we pushing for? And certainly being together in a space and sharing and learning from each other, I think, is one way that makes us feel that this work really has some promise. So thank you, panelists. Thank you so much to participants. And thank you from me. I realized that I never actually introduced myself to everyone. I'm Kira Irwin from Durban, the Urban Future Centre. And yeah, a big goodbye and enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks very much. Take care.